I'm Sarah Peskett, Heritage Officer at St Stephen's Hall in Brighton. Our Heritage Lottery funded project has enabled us to uncover the fascinating and rather grand hidden history of a building which played a vital role in Brighton's development as a fashionable seaside resort. The story of St Stephen's Hall starts in the Old Steine. Until 1730, Brighton was a small fishing and agricultural settlement with a population of around 1,500. The Steine was a flat and marshy area where fishermen would dry their nets and store their boats. In 1750, Dr. Richard Russell published a paper on the health benefits of drinking and bathing in seawater. His recommendations prompted 2,000 visitors to Brighton per week, and it quickly became the most fashionable and popular seaside resort in Britain. Brighton's development, however, could not have happened without the Steine. When visitors were first attracted to the town, it lacked a promenade along the seafront due to severe sea erosion. This is something that residents and visitors to Brighton may find hard to imagine today. However, by 1750, all fashionable and prosperous towns had a promenade, so an alternative site had to be found. The Steine was a sheltered area with sea views where visitors to the town could socialise. The Steine provided easy access to the bathing machines which could be found on the beach to the south of the Steine. In 1752, Samuel Shergold, an innkeeper, and Thomas Tilt, a watchmaker, bought a house on the southwest side of the Steine, which they quickly converted into the Castle Tavern. Soon after the purchase, they bought adjacent plots to expand their business, quickly adding a coffee room and an assembly room in 1754. These were the first assembly rooms in Brighton, which was a significant risk as it was still a small, poor town. But Shergold was an ambitious businessman, and by this time many other towns had assembly rooms for social events attended by high society's fashionable crowd. In 1759, the Old Ship Hotel opened its function rooms. Advertisements from the time tell us that the Castle Tavern and the Old Ship Hotel cooperated and held card evenings and balls alternately. However, an article in Gentleman's Magazine in 1761 stated that the town had two assembly rooms, one almost the best in England except York. The writer was unfortunately referring to the Old Ship Hotel's assembly rooms. This propelled Shergold to rebuild and upgrade the Castle Tavern's rooms in 1766. He commissioned a leading architect, John Crundon, to decorate the rooms, which included a ballroom capable of accommodating 450 people. The ballroom was a lavish and stylish affair, which dominated the Steine and attracted the wealthy. The Castle Tavern's ballroom stood where the Royal Bank of Scotland stands in Castle Square today. A series of letters from John Crundon to Samuel Shergold, which are held at the Keep Records Office, tell us a lot about what the ballroom originally looked like. We know that the frieze and cornices were painted light red and the pillars were originally lilac before being painted yellow when the interior was redecorated a few years later. The doors and woodwork were oiled and painted dead white. The room was furnished with maroon sofas, and mirrors were strategically placed opposite each other to create an optical illusion of space and light. No expense was spared to create an opulent and fashionable space. The Castle Tavern was a valuable asset to the town and paid the highest land tax on any single building. Between 1770 and 1795, around 630 new houses were built. Until the 1780s, East Street formed the edge of the ancient Fore Street village. It was a densely populated area of the town which saw development of many businesses following the opening of the Castle Tavern. After 1780, the development of housing to the east of the Steine began to give it the appearance of an enclosed town recreation and ground. In 1783, the Prince of Wales first visited Brighton, prompted by physicians for health reasons and to escape the constraints of his father. The town left an impression on the Prince of Wales, and in 1787, architect Henry Holland was commissioned to design the Marine Pavilion on the site of Thomas Kemp's farmhouse. By 1806, the Steine was much more built up, but it was still the focal point of much of the town's entertainment. The Castle Tavern Ballroom is the tallest building on the left of this image. The population of Brighton at this time was around 7,000. A year after the Castle Tavern had opened its ballroom, the Old Ship Hotel built new assembly rooms, now known as the Paganini Ballroom and the Regency Suite. These were quickly considered to be the most magnificent public rooms in the town. Samuel Shergold died in 1791 and Thomas Tilt died shortly after in 1809. The Old Ship Hotel was sold at auction in 1802, and rivalry between the two establishments increased under new management. The Castle Ballroom appears to have declined in popularity at the turn of the century. Assemblies were held on the same evening rather than alternate evenings, as had always been the case, and the Old Ship Hotel was said to have far superior location and views. Samuel Shergold's successors did their best to improve the Castle Tavern's facilities, but fashion was changing. The public's taste was drifting away from assemblies towards concerts and entertainments, which the Old Ship was quick to provide. Despite a rebuilding programme which gave the ballroom a new organ, the castle's popularity sagged to such an extent that only 20 subscribers attended the inauguration of its redecorated premises, whereas over 500 guests flocked to the Master of the Ceremonies benefit ball held the same evening at the Old Ship Hotel. The organ installed at this time can now be found in the Royal Pavilion's music room. It is not surprising, then, that in 1814 the ballroom was closed due to a lack of subscribers. The Prince Regent took the opportunity to purchase the ballroom as part of the 7-year redesign of the Royal Pavilion by John Nash, who later remodelled Buckingham House to create Buckingham Palace. The Prince Regent didn't attend church often. The parish church, St Nicholas, was uphill and often overcrowded. The Chapel Royal on North Street was built as an alternative to St Nicholas between 1793 and 1795 to encourage the Prince Regent to attend church more often. However, he took offence to a sermon about immorality and never returned again. The ballroom was purchased in 3 stages between 1815 and 1822 and was connected to the Royal Pavilion via a covered passage from the table decker's room. The ballroom was converted into a private chapel, for which admission was by private ticket, and the king, as he now was, could control what was preached. By this time, John Nash was out of favour with the king. William Tupham was paid £3,687 for fitting up the chapel. A gallery, supported by fluted columns with pews on 2 levels, was added. Heavy crimson drapery and horsehair cushions adorned the gallery. The royal pew was in the centre of the upper level. This was an unexpected arrangement, as by this time the king had abandoned his apartments on the first floor in the pavilion due to his deteriorating health. The king was present at services in the chapel on all his subsequent visits, but did not come to Brighton after 1927. William IV and Queen Adelaide, who can be seen in this image, visited the Royal Pavilion annually and always attended services in the chapel. Queen Victoria also worshipped there during her various visits up to 1842. It is well known that Queen Victoria disliked the Royal Pavilion. She thought it was pretentious and lacked privacy. The arrival of the railway in 1841 dramatically changed Brighton, but also contributed to Queen Victoria's negative feelings about the town. In 1847, large parts of the Pavilion estate were sold off. These areas can be seen in red on the estate plan. The Royal Chapel was destined for demolition. Brighton Town Commissioners intervened in 1850 and bought the Royal Pavilion for £53,000. The Bishop of Chichester, Dr. A.T. Gilbert, claimed that as the chapel had been consecrated, it belonged to the church. This claim was accepted, and £3,000 was deducted from the sum paid to the Crown by the Town Commissioners. An alternative site for the Royal Chapel had to be found. The Vicar of Brighton, Reverend Henry Wagner, and his family were wealthy and influential in the town. They were devoted to improving the situation for poor people. Mary Ann Wagner, sister to Reverend Henry Wagner, had built a number of houses in Montpelier and offered a piece of land and money towards the re-erection of the Royal Chapel on Montpelier Place to serve as a place of worship for the Montpelier-Clifton area. The building was re-erected in 1851. A new street facade was added in the form of a somewhat severe classical temple front, with giant pilasters that matched those of the interior, and to this a single-storey porch was later added. Exactly how the church was eventually moved is not known. Legend has it that it was moved brick by brick, but others believe that this is unlikely, and suggest that a more likely scenario would have been that a new shell was constructed to the exact dimensions of the old building, thus allowing the interior decorations to be removed and carefully reinstated. St Stephen's Church opened on the 25th of July 1851, a mile away from its original location. Consecration of the church was delayed until almost a year later, on the 11th of June 1852, owing to the illness of the Bishop of Chichester. The church held 716 sittings, of which 172 were free. The Vicar of Brighton appointed his nephew Reverend George Wagner as the church's first vicar. Sadly, George Wagner's health was never good, and in 1856 he went abroad in search of a warmer climate. He died of consumption in Malta on the 10th of February in 1857. He was aged 39. The congregation of St Stephen's erected a tablet to his memory in the northwest corner of the church, which is still in position. The original decoration of the ballroom, including the urn frieze and the pilasters ornamented with scrolls, husks, urns and sphinxes, was retained within the church. The altar was positioned in the east recess, flanked by a pair of pulpits with curved staircases, and the organ stood in the opposite recess in the west wall. Reverend Charles Edward Douglas became perpetual curate in 1861. He made minor alterations in the years following 1868, including a porch to the front facade, a vestry to the east side of the building, and scrolled texts which were painted on the interior walls. The alterations cost £630 and were paid for by the congregation. As you can see here, the altar was later moved from the east recess to the shorter north wall, and the galleries were removed. Throughout the 20th century, St Stephen's Church had a checkered history. For a period in the 1930s, the church was associated with spiritual healing. In 1939, St Stephen's Church was discontinued as a place of worship and became the home of the Chichester Church Mission to the deaf and dumb. In 1969, the Sussex Deaf Association was formed as a registered charity and located here. In 1984, BHT acquired St Stephen's Hall and opened First Base Day Centre for men and women who were street homeless in the city. Many of the building's original architectural features were obscured by prefabricated offices that had been built up against the decorative columns and pilasters, burying the rich character of the building. Unfortunately, in February 1987, First Base Day Centre was damaged by fire and moved to temporary accommodation for 6 months while repair work was carried out. In 2010, however, BHT was awarded Heritage Lottery funding to conserve the building. The exterior benefited from extensive repair to the roof structure and rendered to the facade, along with restoration of the belfry and cross. Internally, the vaulted ceiling and 3 large roses were restored, and a section of damaged cornice, adorned with decorative urns, was reinstated in the southwest corner. The east recess, previously boarded up, was exposed to reveal where the altar would have been positioned. The architects took inspiration from Boodle's Private Members Club, another of John Crandon's creations, which is located on Pall Mall in London. The interior renovations were heavily influenced by Osterley House in West London, which models Robert Adams' neoclassical style. Adam was emerging as one of the most fashionable architects in England during the late 1700s. Materials and decor which conformed with traditional Regency fashions but were also hard-wearing and non-clinical were chosen for their suitability in a day centre setting. To further marry old with new, two innovative freestanding pods which do not touch or obscure the original walls were installed to allow Crandon's decorative features to be enjoyed as they were originally intended. St Stephen's Hall is now a light, welcoming and aspirational environment offering a comprehensive range of healthcare, work and learning and housing services to people experiencing homelessness in Brighton and Hove. In 2016, this fascinating building, which has operated as a ballroom, a royal chapel, a church and now a day centre, will celebrate 250 years of history.